Amen. Give the Lord a hand. Everybody needs a Greek word. You need a Greek word? My Greek word is agaliasis. I'll spell it for you later, but it means joy unspeakable, joy that you just can't contain. When we know Christ, that's the kind of joy that we have in it, and the kind of joy we share with the world. Okay, I've done enough.
All right. Thank you. All right, if you'll turn to your program, let's turn to Amazing Grace, and we'll sing verses 1, 2, 3, and 6, and ask everybody to stand as we join together in Amazing Grace. 1, 2, 3, and 6. We've been there 10,000 years. We've been there 10,000 years. Bright shining as the sun. We've known as days to sing God's praise. Then when we first Amen. All right, everybody stay standing. John, can I have you come down for a minute? I'd like to have you open us in prayer this morning. John, it means a lot to me. John was a member here at our church when I came here, and he went into ministry, and he's pastoring a church down in Maynardville now, and I just want John to open us with prayer.
Let's all bow our heads. Eternal God, our Heavenly Father, we are gathered among so many friends and loved ones, and we ask, O Lord, that as we enjoy this moment, that we begin our worship, that you would be pleased by anything we offer unto you, for we struggle at times, but you have always been faithful. You have been faithful through the ages and through the times of this church. You have watched over us and cared for us and kept us strong. You have kept us moving. You have kept us together. And you have done it all for your pleasure and purpose. And that purpose being to reach into this community as we have for 100 years and to see who we may offer Christ to, that we may see who we can bring along with us in our journey. And we give thanks that you have been with us and abide with us and stay with us. Now we ask, O Lord, as we begin this time of worship, that you would send your Holy Spirit, that we may feel your presence, hear your footsteps as you walk among us, and help us, Lord, as we worship you this day, to do it from the best places of our heart, and to be that faithful servant you have called us to be. And all God's people say, Amen.
Be seated, and Randy, I'm going to turn it over to Randy now. And thank you, Randy.
Glad to see all of you here this morning. I want to point out some quick things for you. On the program you've got, on the very back page, you'll see a Post-it note. What we'd like you to do, we'd love you to update by telling us your name and address so we can keep it in our records. We send out invitations like everything. We send out a report at the end of the year. We send out nice programs to tell you what we've been doing with the church. And we got a bunch of them come back undeliverable because we didn't have the right address. So just go ahead and fill that out for us. You can drop it in later in the offering plate, or just drop it up here at the altar. We'll have a plate up here for you. Next thing, to those of you that saw the history of the church on the DVD, the youth, our Geek Squad, each church has a computer Geek Squad. The Geek Squad, our youth, did a fantastic job putting that together, and Sarah did unbelievable producing it. They're going to sell that for $10. If you'd like to buy the DVD, we'll have all the information out here in the hall for you. And it's all for the youth program, and they've done a fantastic job. They spent over 3 months getting these pictures all put together. We have two very special people with us today. Wava Talman is with us. Would you like to come up now? Would you like to come up? I got a chair up here for you. Now, this is Wava Talman. Her husband was Gunnar Talman. We've had a long talk since she's been here, and yeah. There you go. And she's very special to us because Gunnar came here in 1946 to 48. I'll try to say it. When I lived in Texas, I got to know 4 POWs from Vietnam very personally, and I didn't realize what Gunnar had went through before he came to this church. Okay? Gunnar and Wava got married, and 27 days later, he went over to the war. He got captured by the Japanese. Japanese put him in a POW camp.
The
Germans, excuse me, the Germans. Poland, okay. Taken to Poland. In Germany, he got captured. They put him in the prisoner of war camp. There was a physician there, and Gunnar came down sick real bad. Gunnar nearly died. And this physician did everything to save him, and he started improving. The Germans wanted him to go back into camp, and the physician said no. He's still sick. So every morning, even though Gunnar's feet were broke, he took milk and warmed it, put it in a syringe, and shot warm milk into Gunnar, which makes you sick and gets a fever real fast and makes you like you're going to be sick to death. You can't do nothing but lay down. And Gunnar did that every time the Germans showed up to take him back to camp. The physician was so moved by Gunnar because he had such a compassion for people that this physician fell in love with America. Okay? Gunnar got ready to leave the camp, and the word came out that that physician, he was from Yugoslavia. He had a price on his head. The king of Yugoslavia back in 1945, 46, had a price on his head for that physician. So Gunnar did not want that physician to go back. So Gunnar took his dog tags off, took his uniform off, and put it on the physician. And as the Americans were leaving Poland and going to Germany, they snuck him out, and he got to Germany. Then after the war, 46, he came here to Tazewell to preach. And while he was preaching here, his idea was to get an educational type building started. And that's how you're seeing it now. We've got a beautiful education building. The thing happened that was miraculously. Gunnar left here in 48, and Gunnar got a telegram. The physician that saved his life said, "I want to come to America. I love it so much, I've not been there." He said, "I need a sponsor." So Gunnar went with a hosting conference. They had a big, New York had a big Methodist conference up there. So Gunnar got the Methodist preachers up there to sign a petition to sponsor this man. He came over here from Yugoslavia. He gave up his country because he loved this one. And he settled in Kingsport and practiced as a physician over there. And he died, of course, before Gunnar did. But Gunnar welcomed him, sponsored him. They kept up with him. And me and Wava had a long talk. There have been a bunch of believable history from the day I was born. I didn't know this. So I'm going to sit up here with her, and we're going to move the microphone over, and she's going to have a little talk with you.
There you go. Okay. Now tell me if I get too loud or whatever, please. But anyway, let's go back just a minute to Dr. Strofkovich. Dr. Strofkovich came to Tennessee, and then his last service was to the Melungeons in Hancock County, and he died in Kingsport, and Gunnar was with him then, and of course had his. We just happened to be in the States. We had to be in the States on furlough at that time. Otherwise, we would have been in Singapore, and when Dr. Strofkovich died. But it was like a bonding. Now let me say one thing. It's my brother who's here with me. My brother who came to us when we lived here in Tazewell. Now, the first Sunday we came here in late January 1946, there was a big old stove over here and a big old stove over here. And then the parsonage was falling down. When it was not built on, it was built on sand and not on a rock. So it had so we couldn't live in the parsonage when we first came. Is Barbara back there?
Barbara Esri?
Yeah. No, Barbara. I mean, not Barbara. McCullough. Polly's back there. Polly can help me now. And so we had had to. They had to jack up. We lived with Irene Rose across the street. Irene and Nana, and they had to jack up the house for us to be able to move into the house. And we moved into the house. They moved into the house. Polly helped when I was in the hospital here when our first daughter was born. Now, the sequence of all this is Gunnar came out of prison camp in May 1945. And we came, then he was in England General Hospital in Atlantic City as a chaplain to the paraplegics. But when we came here, he still had his uniform, and for until the end of March. We came in the end of January, and he still had his uniform on till the end of March. Now, for just this message today, is Betsy Payne here in the congregation today? No. Betsy's not here, but anyway, I want to add another stanza to Curtis's song, and it's the bonding in Jesus. Will you add that? I'm sorry? The bonding we have in Jesus. The bonding we have in Jesus. So you add that extra, because that's what my message is today, the bonding we have in Jesus. The reason I asked for if Betsy was here, and we were coming home from Singapore. We'd been in Malaysia for 10 years, and then we were then in Singapore in 1964 when our daughters were coming home to college. And we arrived in New Delhi, India, and a dear, dear friend from Tazewell United Methodist Church in the days of his youth, and in many ways our youth too. We were younger too. He arrived in New Delhi, India, to meet us there. And he had arrived from Lahore, Pakistan. Eddie Payne. Eddie Payne, the bonding. And so that was such a blessing and such a treat to meet Eddie. He just appeared. He just appeared there at the mission house in New Delhi, India, from Lahore, Pakistan. And then I've kept in touch with Eddie through the years. And then he was in Arizona, in Tucson, Arizona, after we retired, after Gunner's death. And so we, in our correspondence, after through the years, he was telling about, he was working on his family history. Now, remember, we're talking about the bonding we have in Jesus. He was working on his family history. So I also had a friend that I was corresponding with who was at Scarrett College when I was a student there. And she was working on her family history. And she was living in Orono, Maine. Now, Maine. And I knew her when she was living in Texas. So I said, okay, I've got a friend in working on his family history. And I said, what are you trying to find out? She said, well, do you know anything about New River? And I said, yes, I knew. If I go out my front door and go right, I go across New River. If I go out my front door and go left, I go across New River. So, and she said, I mean the place New River. And so then I found out that I told Eddie about her. And I said, Mary, her name is Mary Curry. And I said, Mary, where are you trying to find? And she said, a place, Tazewell, Tennessee. I said, well, let me get you in touch with my friend in Tucson, Arizona. So Mary Curry in Orono, Maine. Now, remember, we're talking about the bonding we have in Jesus. Mary Curry in Orono, Maine got in touch with Eddie Payne in Tucson, Arizona, and they found out that they had the same grandfather, a great-grandfather, 2 or 3 greats, I'm not sure how many greats, but born in Tazewell, it was from Tazewell, Tennessee. So she in Maine and he in Tucson, Arizona, found out that they had the same grandfather born in Tazewell, Tennessee. So then, as I kept on in touch with both of them, of course, I kept in touch with Eddie until as long as he lived. And then he, Polly, I need your help, honey, because when Eddie let me know about Georgia Sharp, his illness. And right now, I want us to think about who the other young people were in that group of young people who were here in the years between 46 and 48. Eddie Bias and your brothers, and the Ingalls, Shirley and Cecil Ingle in New Tazewell, Buddy and Sylvia Stone. And then in all of this process, I found out that my friend Mary Curry's relatives were Stones, so I got her in touch with Danny Stone to get some information about her relatives here, and she finally came here to Tazewell to find her relatives, and I think she found a cemetery down at Low Mountain. So So I all the time keep in mind that the extra verse for Curtis's song will be "Bonding We Have in Jesus." Now I'm going to change the subject just a little, subject a bit too. You may not realize that people can be sitting in the parsonage, talking to you, Bill. You be sitting in the parsonage and talking to you here in Tazewell, Tennessee, and get a call to go to the other side of the world. Exactly to the other side of the world. In fact, right now it's 20 minutes past 11 at midnight in Malaysia and Singapore, where we went. In the process of this call we had from sitting in the parsonage here. Gunnar went to a conference in Ohio. It's Cleveland, Ohio, where there were 10,000 youth. He went as a counselor for Morristown District. And while he was there, he said that every message that they had from any of the speakers they had from all over the world would talk about the needs that they had in different places in the world. And he said he was sitting there, and while he was at that conference, I'll tell you this part later. He came back from the conference, and he didn't tell me. He didn't tell me, but he was helping Lewis Johnson over in helping Lewis Johnson get packed to go to the Congo, and helping him get all the equipment he needed to go to the Congo. And all the time he was talking about the needs of the world and the needs of the world. And he said, sitting here on the couch, and he said, "Wava, when I was at that conference in Ohio, I felt God calling me to go to the mission field." He said, I survived prison camp. I had survived, my health was restored. I'm the right age. I had the right education. And when I felt God calling me to go somewhere in the world, I couldn't say no. And then I remember this was 2 weeks later. And I said, "Well, why didn't you tell me?" And he said, "Well, I knew you loved Tazewell. I knew you loved being here so much. I knew we were so happy here. Of course, we were expecting our second daughter. And so I just didn't know whether I could tell you or not. I didn't know whether you'd want to go." And I answered him saying, "I've already had a interview with the personnel secretary in the Board of Missions at a conference in Ohio. And that is the reason I happened to be in East Tennessee State College when you were leaving to go into the chaplaincy. That's how I happened to be there at that time, because I was there to get a teacher's certificate, because the personnel secretary in the Board of Missions had told me that I needed a teacher's certificate before I went out as a missionary." And he said, "Well, what, while we waited," so I said, I'm ready to go but he said, "Well, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "I figured that if God wanted us to go, he would have his own way to let you know. I figured that if God wanted us to go, he would have his own way to let you know." And he let Gunnar know. And so then the Menil daughters, one one of the McNeil daughters went with us to Nashville for our first interview with for the Board of Missions. And we got there. My the committee was made up of his professors from Emory University and my teachers from at Scarlett College. So they passed us. So we came back and told Tazewell that we would be leaving to go to the mission field. So that's how we happened to go. And then we went to language school thinking we were going to China. And then while we were in language school, we were sitting there with, watching every day the communists taking Zhejiang across the Yangtze River, the place where we were supposed to go in China. So the Board of Missions said to us, what about you going to another field? We would like for you to consider going to Malaya. Well, we looked on the globe, and Malaya's right there at the equator. And he said, my goodness, we were so hot in Florida. After Gunnar came home from prison camp, how in the world, we're mountain people. How in the world could we ever work in a place so near the equator? So we just thought we would, decided then that maybe we'd consider going to Southern Rhodesia. Southern Rhodesia at that time. And then Dr. Archer, in the personnel secretary in the board of New York, said, well, no, just go out there and sit I have to see somebody. You just go there and sit for a while and wait, or you can go out shopping in New Wait about an hour. So we picked up a little magazine. Now, this sounds like a fictitious story, and I know I'll find that magazine somewhere because I know we've kept it, but I haven't found it yet. But a magazine called The Methodist Woman, and in it was an article, Why Not Malaya? Why not Malaya? So we went into the personnel secretary, Dr. Archer, and said, well, we came here to consider going to the possibility of going to Rhodesia, but we are ready to talk about going to Malaya. And he said, well, I was out there for 30 years, but Mabel Marsh had answered in a positive way every reason we had thought we could not go to Malaya. She answered every positive. When we got to Malaya, one of the first persons we met, then Gunnar said to Mabel Marsh, said, oh, you're responsible for us being here. She said, I never knew that article got printed. But it's just, you don't doubt. You don't doubt when you get all the answers and the bonding that comes in those special ways. So that's how we happened to go. And we were in Malaya then for 10 years and in Singapore for 20 years. Now, do you have a question? Let me go back to my contact with Eddie. Remained all the years, and before Eddie died, we were still there was Eddie Bias also, but Eddie Payne, and kept in touch. And he was the one who called me about Georgia, and then I got a call from Eddie's family. Eddie's sister, and Eddie's wife. I got a call when he died, but I had expected him to die any time because he was telling me goodbye before. But the emphasis that I want to leave with you is there is bonding in Jesus. There is bonding in Jesus around the world, around the world. And if you get a call to go, if you get a call, now I want to leave one thing. God calls people to stay the same way He calls people to go. Don't ever forget that God calls you to stay and do what you can do here, in Tazewell, or what you can do in Claiborne County, or what we can do in Blacksburg, Virginia. God calls us to stay, it's just as real as He calls us to go. So don't think because I've said that God called us to go to the other side of the world for 30 years, that we all have to go to the other side of the world. In fact, right now in Singapore, every time we go to annual conference, they build another church. And right now in Singapore and Malaysia, the Malaysians and Singaporeans are sending missionaries to Cambodia and Vietnam, and they are just as thankful for their sending their missionaries to Cambodia and Vietnam and to Indonesia and to the islands of the Pacific as we are thankful in America for the missionaries that we're sending. And that's such a delight for me to get the newspapers from Malaysia and Singapore, where they are just so happy about the missionaries that they've been sending, and getting reports from the missionaries that they have from those countries. So there is a bonding around the world. Now, do I have a question?
Does anybody like to ask a question?
If you have I'd rather be interviewed a lot more. I would much rather be interviewed but I do want to leave the bonding. What?
Could you tell about the ship over there through the Suez Canal?
Oh, well, I thought we went out to Malaya the first time on a freighter, and we got out of out of the port in New York. Now on a freighter with two little girls. One was 3 years old, and one was 16 months old. One was 3 years and 4 months, one was 16 months. So they have the same birthday, born in Tazewell, Tennessee, on April 3rd. One in 46 and one in 48. So anyway, we had these two little girls on this freighter. And the freighter was going this way and this way and this way and this way. And I thought, how in the world would anybody ever go on a ship for pleasure? I couldn't imagine anybody would ever go on a ship. We did go through the Suez Canal, and it was just like, it was so hot, so hot. The ship was not air conditioned either, and so getting through the Suez Canal in that way is that the question you mean? Yeah, it was very, very, very hot, and then we went ashore in the Colombo, Ceylon, when it was one of our first places. It was in Ceylon, Sri Lanka now, but they took us to this trash truck driver took us to the worst place in Colombo. I mean, he took us through the worst area. And we thought, oh my goodness, what are we going to get into when we get to Malaya? But anyway, we were got there on Sunday morning, and this wonderful Chinese couple, Dr. and Mrs. Ho Sing Ong, met us at the boat and took us to church. And we went to church that morning in Penang, in Malaya, and they were singing "Crown You with Many Crowns." So, if I start on that, I may talk about 30 years, and I will be glad to be interviewed sometime. But Gunnar and I had such a wonderful, wonderful year. And talking about staying, he had 6 wonderful years as associate pastor in Blacksburg United Methodist Church. I would say some of his best years. And now the Kiwanis Club has a Gunnar Talman Day every year, and the Mental Health Association of Blacksburg has a Gunnar Tauman Day every year. You've been a part of some of those, I think, when you were in Radford. So he had really 6 wonderful years in Blacksburg after we came home from Malaya. From Singapore, actually. We came home from Singapore. Do I have another question, or
Anybody else like to ask her a question?
But if you don't, no, you can ask me later. If you haven't, if you. Thank God for the bonding we have in Jesus.
Amen.
Thank you so much. Now I can tell you the end of the story of her husband, Gunnar. She wanted to talk about bonding with Jesus. If you can imagine, all of you, if you were in a prisoner of war, all these people, what Gunnar did, I told you, he took off his dog tags and his uniform. What they did was they took that Yugoslavian physician and put him right in the middle. So when the Germans come in and says, "We're moving you," then they shoved him right in there so tight that all they could see was American uniforms.
The Americans that came in.
Yeah.
Americans came in with trucks.
Okay.
Trucks, and Dr. Strokovich in the European uniform, and got in on an American truck.
Right.
Got into Germany then, of course Germany was free then.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, what I mean is, the Americans were responsible for Germany.
Yeah. There. Yes. That's.
When he got out, he got out, he had his old division.
Oh. Okay.
The chaplain, his former chaplain, checked it to see if he's still in his wedding ring.
I'll be. Okay. She's got a lot to tell you all, and feel free to go up to her and talk. She's told me a lot about the history of Tazewell and the history of New Tazewell, and it's really amazing. So now we have.
Just thank God for this beautiful place.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you all for making it so beautiful.
Yes. Now our next is special music.